All right. Hello, hello, hello. How you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm good, and yourself?
I'm blessed, man. I'm blessed. I can't complain at all. So we out here on this Sunday, this beautiful, cloudy Sunday.
Oh yeah.
Who are we with today?
So you're with Cleos Glory Young, which is the founder and president of the Tebet Foundation. And the Tebet Foundation is basically a grassroots nonprofit here in Philadelphia, which is based on the philosophy, principles, and procedures of the what you would say the airport whole industry. So that's the basic concept of the Tebet Foundation, which we utilize the philosophy, principles, and procedures of the airport to literally address the social issues that human beings are having.
That's deep. I mean, I never really heard that before. You saying you're relating or you're correlating the mental health issues that people have with the airport. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah. So for me, and this is how I became aware of this because it wasn't something I was like literally looking for. But I was going through my own mental health issue. And you have that, what some people would say, like a gut feeling. So I had that gut feeling, and it introduced me to what I would call the black box. The black box is this equipment on the plane. So when there's a crash, this is what the authorities would go look for and basically study and see what happened during that process of what causes the crash, right? So this was what was introduced to me in my gut, like, hey, go and look at this, the black box. And it began to like give me the instructions of what to do. And at that point, I was literally like at the worst part of my life. Later, I found out that I was in a depressive state. So when I started to understand it now, it was like, hey, go and look at this and utilize it, which is basically saying that your life crashed. Like from psychology, it's called depression, but in the aviation industry, it's called a crash. So once again, I was able to now look at this message that I was getting and then now following the instructions of what I got to do. And literally, my life went from like down here to here in a whole nother level, just following those instructions, which piqued my interest to say, hey, if this black box concept could do this for my life, what else is in the airport that could really help us? And I began to really study and understand the principles of the airport, the philosophy, and the procedures. And the more I was able to understand these things, is the more I was able to now correlate them to my own life. And what I started to do now, I started to apply them to my life, and I saw my life was going to a whole nother level. And that's what really brought my interest into the whole airport concept.
Okay. Okay. So you said like the idea of the black box. That we
Yes.
whenever a plane crashes, you always see here and you go take a look at that black box to see what went wrong or what were the last messages or anything like that. And you sat here and said, well, when you crash, that's a depressed state. Okay, that makes sense. Can you explain to me like the different just break down can you break down the airport, the different gates, and how that correlates to our mental health?
So the airport, and it's funny because if you look at it, it's called the airport, right? So in psychology, I learned that basically everything that we're doing, um, when we go into what is called a fight, flight, or freeze mode, is basically the condition of the air that we're breathing. So basically, if you look at it, it's almost understanding that, hey, if you feel threatened by something, then it's going to impact your mental state, right? But your mental state now starts to calculate the air that you actually breathe. So when you look at it from a standpoint, it's almost like, hey, if you're safe, this is how you breathe. If you're unsafe, then this is how you breathe. And it's like understanding that what you would say the condition of who we are is run by the air that we breathe in and out. It's understanding now how the airport would be a philosophy that we can utilize for a life, because The planes, what? They utilize the air to get to where they need to get to in life. And it's like basically when you understand that now, the psychology behind it is like, how do you utilize the air to now make your life go to where you need to go? And people understand this. So here we're in nature, right? H2O. What is H2O? Hydrogen and oxygen. What is that? Those are a part of gas, but it's also the air, right? The element of air. What is it that the trees give us? Oxygen, right? So again, that's a part of the air. So if you start to understand these things and then start to apply them to your life, then you can see how your life will move from what is called a depressed state to a state where you're thriving in life. And these are things that people know. People who live in the suburbs have a better quality of air than people who live in the city. And then now do the correlation. Who typically have more mental health issues? Those who are living in the suburbs or those who are living in the city life? So when you start to understand that now, that's how I started to make sense of everything that was going on in the airport. And it's like, hey, these things that no one has ever taught us is like applicable to the airport, but they're also applicable to our life. And that's how I started to really venture off into what I thought was weird at that particular moment, because it's like looking at the airport and saying, hey, how could you help human life with an entity that has nothing to do with a human life? Until you really start to understand the principles, the philosophy, the procedures that run this entity, and realizing that you can take those principles, the philosophy, and the procedures and then apply them to your life and watch your life do the same thing that the plane does, which is aviate and go to a whole new destination, which is practically what we're all trying to do if we're what is called in a mental state where we're depressed or we have anxiety or trauma or these issues that are plaguing us on a day-to-day basis. What we want to do is to aviate away from them and go to a whole new destination where these things are not plaguing us anymore.
So how does your program or the airport, how does that help people aviate to where they want to go?
So the again, the idea is understanding the philosophy. So even in our culture, we talked about what is called elevate, right? You need to elevate your life. When I started to understand the difference between elevate and aviate, I no longer use elevate. So when I started to understand these things now, I'm like, hey, how do I aviate my life? Which is now getting my mindset to get to a higher level. The difference between elevate and aviate, and I could distinguish this. Elevate your life just means that it's like an elevator, you just go up. But the thing about that, once you're up, you're constantly in that same location. Just look at the elevator. Once you take it to the highest floor, you're still at that address. There's no plane that ever aviate and stay in the same location. It always goes to a whole new location. So if you understand the context of that is understanding what type of words are you using to associate with your life. So I started to now look at the dynamics. Words have power. So what do I want to do? Do I want to elevate my life or do I want to aviate my life and go to a whole new destination? So this is how now understanding the philosophy, the principles and procedures of the airport and now saying, hey, I want to aviate my life. So that now registering what? My mentality that this is what I want. And that's what now I started to live my life in what I would say aviate. Like my hashtag is aviate your mind. Because once you're able to take your mind to a higher level and then move it somewhere else, then you don't consider yourself in that thing that is plaguing you anymore.
Mm.
Which is totally different from just saying, hey, let me rise above and elevate my life, right? Where are you coming back? You're coming back down to the same thing. And then look at that now. When people are sitting here smoking, right? And I'm not throwing any shades on anyone that's smoking. What do? They get high, right? And it's like, hey, your problems is gone. But when that high like disappears, they come back down what? Into the same problem because they never move. It's just their mentality move from getting high now and say, hey, I got high. Elevate. but you came back down to the same problem that you're having. So even for me, like when I aviated from my depression, I never went back there. I transformed my life. This is what I'm doing in the community now, like showing people how to take your crash moment, right? And transform it into something greater. And now I'm living as a, like, I'm not just talking about it. Like, you see the things that I'm doing. I wrote the book, The Airport Adventure. And not only that, I wrote the book. I was a previous author before. Now I brought this whole concept of a book to a whole new destination. So the last book that I published, which is called the Airport Adventure Bookazine, what I did was blend a regular children's book and a magazine together and call it a bookazine. So now when I go to other places now where other authors are, right, and we're speaking about books, like they're talking about books from the old location. I'm talking about books from a whole new destination, and I have the proof in my hand to show you that I'm the first author that I'm aware of that ever put together what is called a bookazine, which became the platform that I started to build everything else on.
So how exactly did you use? How did you apply the lessons that you learned about the airport to sit here and aviate instead of elevate when you were going through a depressive state?
So that idea, moving away from elevate to aviate, was something that I started to understand over a period of time. So it's not something that I just gravitated towards. Like, I kid you not, I used to take flights just to do experiments. Like, I would go visit a family member or a friend, right, in a different city, just to do experiment and saying, all right, let me see how long it takes to get a plane off the ground, from the runway off the ground. And I kid you not, each time that I was flying, I was recording it and saying, hey, how long does it do here, right? Then I began to ask questions, interview pilots, flight attendants, workers at the airport. Like, I began to really dive into it and started to understand, okay, what does aviate mean? And when I started to understand these things now, I'm like, hey, I no longer needed to use this. I needed to apply this to my life. And when I applied it, I started to see the adjustment of things started to move this way in my life. And that's when I'm like, okay, this is what I need to utilize now. No longer using this. And now I could make the distinction between elevate and aviate. It's something that I literally had to study. It's not something I just got up and say, oh, aviate, and like literally taking flights, looking at how long does it take to get the flight off the ground. Traveling in the air, looking out and saying, okay, let's look down on the ground, right? What happens? When you are, say, 33,000 feet, right, at this level and you're moving and you're looking down on the ground, you can see how these big things that we would look at here, right? When you're up here, they look so small. And this is how I was able to correlate it. Now I was like, wow. So when you're stuck in your problem, right? They're like this big, gigantic, titanic thing. But when you're able to now go to a higher level and you look down on them, then they become these small, tiny, like jigsaw puzzle, right? And this is the concept of the mind. Because if you're on the ground and they look like these huge titanic thing, you can't actually help yourself to get out of them. So the mind feel like, hey, I'm trapped, I can't get out. But once you aviate and get your eye to this level and you start to look down and your problem seems like this little thing, then it's like, oh, I could handle that. And you're telling the mind that you can handle these things. So that's how now when I started to look at it, like, hey, when you aviate and you get to a higher level, it's like, hey, you can look at your problems now and like, oh, I could get rid of this. I could get rid of this. I could handle this. And mentally, you start to feel it. And now you start to feel it, then you start to believe it. And sooner or later, you start to act upon it. And it's like, hey, these problems start to now disappear because you have aviated. And then if you're moving to a new location, then you're going somewhere where those problems don't exist anymore. And that's how I was able to actually identify the difference between elevate and aviate.
So, what steps or what tools do you use to aviate instead of elevate?
So again, I started to study and understand it. So here's what I figured out. When you know something, right?
No,
Which
so,
is,
so let me reframe it like this.
yeah.
What steps could a regular folk, a person, sit here and using your method could sit here and start taking?
So that's where I was getting to. So anything you do in life, this is why they say knowledge is power, right? That's what I first did. I got the knowledge of it, which is like saying, hey, I know how to drive a car, right? That's the knowledge. But at the end of the day, I really had to study it and understand it, which is totally different from just having the knowledge. Now I'm understanding, all right, why is it when I turn the key now, this car could go? Why is it when I press on the gas now, this car is moving? It's no longer just saying, hey, I'm driving the car. I know I have the knowledge of how to drive it. And that's the same thing with anything that you're looking at. So Aviate is like, hey, I know what it is, right? To take it to a higher level. But what you have to do now, you have to understand it. And when you start to understand these things and it becomes a part of your daily understanding, then your life will start to lean towards that understanding that you have. So again, if it's aviate, and this is applicable to anything, not just the concept of aviate, anything that you want to start to now practice as a part of your life, know what it is and then lean towards understanding it. When you start to put those things together, knowing and understanding, then it starts to build the confidence of who you are inside. And that alone now equates to what is called your belief. And when you start to have a belief in the mind, then the mind starts to gravitate towards those things that you believe. So literally that's how now you can start to now practice these things, knowing it and then understanding it. And you understand something by studying it, not just by looking at it and say, hey, I know what it is. Like you have to study it. And this is why like it is critical for us to understand what is called research and study. So these are things that scientists they do. They research and they study things and they figure them out. Not just know them, they understand how they work, right? And when you understand how something works, it's like it becomes a part of your belief system now. And that now starts to gravitate towards where your mind is going. And if you
Mm,
don't understand that, go to any school, because that's what they do in the school. They teach you something, meaning that you know it, and then they start to break it down so you can understand it. And then now, basically, what happens, they don't have to walk around you anymore because you have knowledge and you have understanding. These things are going to be applicable of what you play out in your life.
mm, okay, okay. So this airport adventure all stemmed from your own mental health state.
Yes.
So what does mental health mean to you?
Mental health is about the, it's a, it's very, it's like a twofold because it says mental health, right? Which is about the state and well being of your mental capacity, right? But I kid you not, it doesn't have anything directly to do with your mental health. So let's put it in context. And I'm going to use the plane for you to truly understand, right? So, who flies the plane? The captain and the first officer, right? But those people which are in the cockpit, right? They don't typically leave until the passengers come on the flight, right? So look at this context where I'm going with it. So the pilot and the first officer sits into what is called the cockpit. The cockpit is like the head of the body. The passengers, they come in and they go to the back of the plane, which is like the belly. It's ironic because the cargo area where they push the suitcase, they call it the belly of the plane. So look at this. The passengers come in, they go into what you would say the belly of the plane. That is what controls the pilot and first officer to say, now, hey, I'm ready. So if the passengers don't come on the plane, right, then the cockpit, which is the head part of it, the cockpit doesn't get ready to take off. So the concept of mental health, you're having a mental health issue because of what's in your belly. So when we're talking about mental health issue, they typically looking at it and saying, hey, this is what is going on with your head, which is like the cockpit. But if you understand the concept, it's not really what's going on in your head. It's what's going on in your belly, your stomach. So when you talk about mental health, it's like a catch 22 because people are directly looking at the mental capacity of who we are, but directly that is coming from the belly. And then let's go back to the air that we were talking about, right? So air rises, right? Which is like gas rises. So anything that goes in your stomach, it starts to what? Rise up. It's the system of the body. It's like literally, even when someone say punch you in the stomach, where does the tears come from? Out of your eyes, right? So when you look at that, the things that we're putting in our stomach, which is why they ask us to watch the things that we eat, right? The things that comes in and go down, this is where the elevate would come from. The things that comes in and go down, right? They're gonna elevate back up. They're going to come back out of who we are. So when you start to look at that now, it's the whole concept of how this really applies to who we are. It's like basically understanding that you're having a mental health issue, not because of the cockpit area, but because of down here, what's going on down here. So it's again, it's like a catch 22 that we're taught to believe it's like directly mental health, not knowing that half the stuff that you're going through is what's going on in your belly, in your stomach, in your digestive system, all these things. And as that relates to even mental health and trauma, right? So I use the airport concept and I teach trauma. And one of the things that I started to understand, which wasn't my ideology, like I studied what he was preaching and teaching. His name is Dr. Gabor, and he identified that trauma starts in the uterus, right? So when you look at it and saying, "Hey, trauma starts in the uterus," where's the uterus? Down in this area. So again, now when you look at the impact of trauma, it mentally devastates someone, right? But Dr. Gabor is identifying that, hey, it starts in the uterus. So if you look at it again, it's the concept of where you say, hey, whatever is down here, it's going to continue now to what? Elevate and go to the head. So you're having a mental health issue, not because of what's going on in your head, but because what have lodged into your stomach or your uterus and stuff like that. So again, it's a catch 22. And me being in this field now and understanding these things about the plane, the airport, and all these things, I started to decipher it and like, hey, this is what they were talking about when they talk about mental health. Like I come from what is called the cockpit, and the cockpit is where the pilot and first officer stays to fly the plane. That's like the head. And then literally now the passengers they come, they go into the belly. And I kid you not, there's a equipment at the back of the plane. It's actually called the elevator. And the elevator controls the nose of the plane. So when the plane goes up, it's because the elevator on the back is actually causing it to go up. When it goes down, it's the elevator at the back that is causing it to actually go down. And I'm sharing this with you so you can understand the things that are impacting us here is not coming from here. They're coming from down here. This is how the elevator of the plane works. Whatever the plane is doing up front is controlled from the back.
Okay, okay, okay. So what have you learned? Like, so what has your like when you define trauma?
Yes.
How has that changed since before you got into airport adventures and now that you've been in airport adventures for a while now?
So with trauma, I started to understand it in psychology classes. And then being in the community and hearing about PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, and stuff like that, you started to understand it. And I became aware of it when, like, fully aware of it when I was doing an interview for the Airport Adventure book. And after that, the person who interviewed me said, "Hey, you sound like this doctor guy," which is the guy that I just mentioned, Dr. Gabor. And she's like, "Oh, he's one of the leading trauma experts around the world. I need you to actually study him and understand what he's teaching, and then now begin to now teach it to our folks, if you can put two and two together." So I started to really go into, hey, who is this Dr. Gabor guy that I'm being compared to? And when I started to understand who he was again, I didn't just know him, I started to really study and understand his work. And the more I understood his work, I saw how he was now bridging the gap of giving us a whole new understanding of what trauma is compared to what we have learned. So from there now, I started to look at it and it's like, hey, how do I get into this now that I can begin to teach it to our people? And when I started to teach it now, I was coming from Dr. Gabor's understanding because that's who I studied. And I would go home and it's like, yeah, I got a standing ovation for the teaching that I just did. But when I went home, I didn't feel good. It's like, hey, that's not you. That's Dr. Gabor. Like if you watch my presentation was like filled with Dr. Gabor's video, right? And because I considered him the leading expert in the trauma field, I was utilizing some of the things that he was saying because to me it's like, hey, you don't know anything about trauma yet, but you have an understanding. But you can really go to it now and say, hey, this is what the experts are saying as well. So that's how I did my first two trauma workshops. From there now it was like, hey, that's not you. And it's like now I sat back and I was like, hey, what's me? The airport adventure. And I started to sit down and understand now, where in the airport does trauma exist? And it doesn't exist as a physical concept, but the same concept that it gave me with the black box, it showed me. And when it showed me this concept, it is called what I call return to gate. Return to gate is a concept where a plane goes out and either takes off on the runway or it goes to the runway. Something happened and then it has to come back to the gate. So when it showed me that context of what this trauma really is, it's like, wow, I was able to now understand it from PTSD. You fight the war, you leave the war, you go somewhere else, but you're returned back to the war when something actually interferes with you. It's almost like if you smell something, it brings you back to the war. So when I understood now, oh, return to gate, you're coming back where you started because something happened out there. It was like, wow, that is the whole concept of trauma. It's like you're returning to something over and over and over that's triggering you, and it brings you back to the same place that you started out with. And when I started to understand that now, it's like the philosophy of the airport is around what? Safety. Everywhere that you go in the airport, you always hear them talk about safety. So now when you look at putting the two together, it's like you try to take off, something was unsafe, so you had to return. So if I could now give you that concept of the philosophy and said, hey, how could I make you safe? Then you would never return to that, come back to the gate. So when I started to understand that now, that's what I began now to teach in the community of understanding what return to gate is and why would a plane return to the gate, and showing it the correlation between you and trauma and how you continue to be triggered by this thing that allows you to come back to that same situation that you're dealing with, which is the concept of what? Elevate. You go up, but you come back right down to that same address. So this is how now I was able to understand it with trauma.
Mm, okay, we got like surprise visitor. It seemed like you chilled though. What's up, bro? How are you? Oh, okay, you off my note. Okay, all right. Okay. So, so you talked. I like that. That's actually very understandable. That's very very understandable.
And
Yeah.
that's literally when I got that, that just opened up my whole understanding of what trauma really is to a higher level. Because it's like generation after generation, we keep coming back to the same problems. Like, I listened to a tape with Marcus Garvey, and I was like, wow, this is like 100 years ago, and we're still faced with the same problems that was plaguing the generation of Marcus Garvey. So it's like we're coming back to the same gate, gate after gate after gate, and returning to the same situation that we've been in. It's now like they made it into a mental concept, which is like, let me no longer enslave you, right? But now mentally capture you, because if I can get your mind to not aviate, then I will continue to have you elevate, right? Think that you're high and you're mighty, but you're still in the same location.
I like that. Yeah. So you said that this so this has been a problem since the Marcus Garvey time. So what exactly do you feel as though is preventing what are we talking about the black community? We're gonna talk about the black community. What do
Yeah.
you think is stopping the black community from aviating instead of elevating?
So what's stopping the black community from aviating is because they never have an understanding of aviating. What was given to us was elevate. And it's almost like, again, if I capture your mind, it does. Let's go back to trauma. When trauma captures your life, it doesn't give you the full capacity to see everything that's going on, right? Because what, look at it. Dr. Gabor is saying that, hey, it starts from the uterus, right? But if you look at the research that is shown out there, how trauma impacts you, you'll see how it impacts the mental capacity, right? So look at it now. When trauma really impacts us, mentally, it interferes with us, right? What's mentally about who we are? Our senses. So mental capacity, right? Our senses, our sight, our smell, our taste, our hearing. Four of the five senses that we have identified is in the mental capacity of who we are, right? So look at it now. If it's being interfered with through the mental capacity, that means you're not seeing right. You're not smelling right. You're not tasting right. You're not hearing right. And if you're not doing these things right, then what happens now? I could tell you anything and you'll just listen to it and believe that this is the way life ought to be, because you're not able to put your senses together, because your senses are not fully intact. So when someone comes up to you and say, hey, elevate, it sounds good, and you elevate. But what happens now? You're not able to make the connection that elevate comes from the word, the concept of elevator. An elevator just goes up. It always comes back down. Just as they say, anything that goes up comes back down. So when we start to look at this in the black community, because we have been so traumatized, other people have come in and told us all these things or given us these things. And because our senses are not fully intact, then we just run with these things. And then what happened now? We have to return to the gate. Generation after generation, we're returning to the gate and not seeing the bigger picture that these, and I don't want to say these people, but it's like people out there, they don't have our best interests. Even from a constitution standpoint, they didn't look at you as a full human being. So when you look at that concept now, it's like, hey, how do I take advantage of you without you knowing? And literally, this comes back to trauma. Because when you disrupt the digestive system, the uterus, this internal stomach part, then what happened? It destroys your entire life and you wouldn't even know it, because now I'm giving you things that's going to appease you and not really things that please you. And this is what has been going on in the black community generation after generation. We're returning to the gate. Marcus Garvey is dealing like said stuff that we're still dealing with 100 years ago. How could that be? That means we haven't advanced, we haven't moved to the next level. So you can literally see that we get high and we go somewhere and then we return back to the gate because those things were never meant for you. Um, Going back to psychology, I remember in one of my classes, the professor said, hey, psychology was never developed for black people. So when you look at it now, clinically, we are following all these psychological rules, but it was never developed for us
Why exactly did the professor say that psychology?
because we weren't considered a full human being.
Mm.
So they weren't looking at developing something for you. And I remember I was at a trauma event and there was a doctor that came, I think he came from DR or Cuba or one of them to be at the conference and speaking. And even him was sharing his own experience of saying, yeah, these things that are designed are not designed for real to really fit us. Because when they're doing the survey and the research and stuff like that, they're not utilizing us. They're utilizing someone else to now, hey, let me take your body mass and make this medication. But that body mass that medication is based on is not based on the black community, it's based on somebody else. So when you take the same medication, now what happens? You have a different body mass. So it's like it's not gonna work the same. So when you look at these things now, we're in a country where the country doesn't cater to us really. It just put things in our way to appease us, not to really please us, right? So at the end of the day, it's like we're getting things that literally isn't for us. And it's like driving a car and saying, hey, you know, the car uses what is called engine oil. But because I'm a good cook and I understand cooking oil, I'm going to pour it in the engine because it's still oil, right? Cooking oil versus engine oil. Oh, I could just substitute. No, you can't. So when you put the cooking oil in the engine now and you're driving, eventually that car is going to break down, not because it's called oil. That means you need to put it in there. And that's the same thing that has been going on. So I had to really look at this for the airport. Like the whole concept of it is like, is this really applicable to our people? So if you go back to who we are as African way back when, right? They used to utilize the air for everything. This is how they built the pyramid. The pyramid was connected to the air. Like they understand the astronomy of everything before they did it on the ground. So when I look at that, I'm like, hey, this is what our whole philosophy was before they invented this airport. That's what our ancestors used to use. The entire air system that is utilized by the airport, right? That's what our ancestors used to use. And literally transform our life into those great things that they were able to build, that we're now sitting here and saying, hey, how did you build that pyramid and you didn't have the equipment that we have today? Because they understood in tapping into the astronomy of things, the astrology of things, all these things they understood. And it was all about as above, so what? So below. So when I'm talking about the airport, it's not just looking at it as a physical entity, it's understanding the dynamics of the air, the higher level. When you tap into that, which is, let me put it in context for you. When you go to college, it is called what? Higher education, right? When you go to the religious institution, whether the church, the mosque, they always trying to get you to what? A higher deity, right? A higher God. When you sit down on the street and you're smoking your weed, right? You're trying to get what? High. That has been the premise of everything that people are looking for, how to get to a higher level. Because when you get to a higher level mentally, it takes your whole body with you. And that's how you start to now alleviate or aviate away from your problems. It's only when you're on a low level, which is called low vibration, that causes you to inherit all these mental health trauma, all these anxiety, all these things plays out because now I have you on a what is called a low vibration. And literally, that's what they have done to us in the black community. The food that we're eating, they make the food that it now brings us on a what? Low vibration. The knowledge that I'm giving you is on a low vibration. Why? Because it's lies and deceptions. And anything that comes in lies and deception is not at its full capacity. So I'm giving you things that are watered down, right? So when they're watered down, funny enough, we're by the water, right? When it's going down, it's mean that you're at the bottom. Watered down, meaning that it's at the bottom, right? So these things that I'm giving you is making you on a low vibration. The clothes that we wear, they designed to be what? On a low vibration. And then now when it comes to us as say black people or African Americans, right, interacting with each other, they make it in such a way that your mental capacity is on a low vibration. So when a low vibration meet a low vibration, what do you think is going to happen? A crash. Because none of them is able to decipher that what I'm saying or doing is wrong because they're not in the right frame of mind. So again, this is why it's important to aviate your mind so you can begin to now solve your problem, because this person that's coming up to you, that's you. But you can't decipher that because you're on such a low vibration and you would rather now beat up this person, threaten this person, or do something that's going to be ill to this person, and you just devastated your own self. And that's what has been done to us in the black or African American community all over the world. They have made us on what is called a low vibration. And this is why I'm so intricate in using the airport concept, because the airport concept is all about the philosophy of going higher. That's what all the planes do. They take off and go higher. But the difference between elevate and aviate, those planes now, they go what? To a whole new destination. And that's what we're all trying to do, to get to a new destination where we're not plagued by mental health issue, trauma, anxiety, depression, stress. All these things are things that people have studied and understood how, listen, study and understood it, how to keep us in what is called a low vibration. And at that point, you can't see and decipher everything that someone is going to give to you now. So you just get things that are appeasing to you and not things that's supposed to be pleasing to advance who we are as a people.
So you're saying that because psychology or the study of psychology in this country was never meant specifically for the people, for the black community,
Yeah.
all the information that we're giving is only meant to see and elevate us, but never see and meant to aviate us, because the information that we're given is watered down, and the information that's watered down is low vibration information.
And that is correct. You place it in the right context. And I could show you this. So there's psychology, right? And then there's astronomy. Which one did our people use back then? Astronomy. And everything that psychology does, astronomy does it on a higher level. Astronomy is understanding how your thoughts and feelings are. Psychology is understanding how your thoughts, your feelings, your mind, behavior, all these things correlate to who you are, right? Astronomy, let's take the sun. Doesn't the sun give you energy? It dictates the thought that you have, the feelings that you have. The moon, the same thing, the stars, the planets. All these things in astronomy contributes to who you are as a person. Your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior, all these things. Look at it and they break it down into astrology, right? Which comes from astronomy. So astrology is saying that, hey, you're an Aquarius. If you're an Aquarius, then you're going to behave a certain way. You're going to think a certain way, which is different from what? A Virgo, right? Somebody who's a Virgo or somebody who's a Pisces. Totally different, the way you act, the way you think, the way you behave. All of that is a part of astronomy, which is broken down into what? Astrology, right? Now look at it from a psychological standpoint. Psychology, psych, which is the root word, means the mind. The mind has to do with how you think, the thoughts that you have, how you feel, and your behavior. So in psychology, which is a broken down concept, right? It's saying that your thoughts, your ideas, your thinking, your belief, your feelings are what I'm studying. And then now I could dictate the way I get you on what is called a low vibration, because there's things that I'm going to give you through psychology is not astronomy. They're a watered down version of that. So now I could literally show you now how I'm giving you the wrong thing. Going back again, you have cooking oil and you have engine oil. You can't put cooking oil in an engine, car engine, and say, oh, I'm going to run this forever. So this is why we continue to crash generation after generation. And it's like, we got to return to gate now and start over. And look at it even in the wealth field. We continue to say, oh, now we're talking about generation and wealth, right? Because the concept was, I'm young, I grew up, I had no wealth. What is it that the child that I'm going to have what? They're going to come again. They have to start at the gate again. So I could now try to build up my wealth, right? Then this generation come and it's like, hey, I got to start again. Other people is like they have generation wealth. Like this one starts here, so the children starts here, take it to another level. The children, and generation after generation, we're trying to get wealthy. Why? Because we have to return to the gate. Every one of us in the black community, it's like we have to return to the gate. Other people have taken off, and in other countries moving and moving, we're still at the gate because we have issues, right? Remember, the plane returns to the gate because there's some type of unsafe issue. Who's one of the most unsafe set of people in America or in the world? Us. Even with police brutality, that's contributing to us, making you what? Unsafe. So everything that is done is to make us unsafe. And when you make somebody unsafe, it controls the whole dichotomy of their body, which means that you are not in the position to what? Take off and go to a whole new destination. And no plane will ever take off on the runway if it's deemed unsafe, because they know that it's going to be a catastrophe once it goes up. And this is what has been done to us generation after generation. We've been crashing. And the principle, go to any airport, the philosophy of any airport is safety, all the way through the airport to the landing. Safety is prioritized. Translate safety to our life now. When you can't get to your destination, is because something in you is unsafe or around you. Apply safety to that position now and see how you get to all the destinations that you want to get to. If me and you are together and we're safe with each other, right? And the mind could detect that. If I'm around you, that doesn't mean I'm safe. The mind could detect, hey, I don't trust you, which is the biggest thing in the black and brown community. We don't trust each other. What does trust go back down to? You feel unsafe. So if you feel unsafe, the mind could detect that, and it's like, hey, these are things that are chipping us away generation after generation. We're being chipped away of our safety. And I learned this through the airport. No plane can take off if it's unsafe. And if it takes off while it's safe and it goes out and then becomes an obstacle in the way, it has to return to the gate because it's no longer safe. And this is what has been going on in our life generation after generation.
So can you give us an experience or just a time where you used the information that you learned and you studied to help someone else?
So, one of our conferences that we did, there was a family that came out. And I'm actually heading to a conference next week in Florida. But this is tied to the family that came out, and literally it was the daughter, the mom, and the grandmom that came out to the conference. And when they started to understand the concept of trauma, the way I projected it to the audience, they changed the way they started to do parenting with each other. Three generations started to understand why is it that they were like this with each other growing up. And now they were able to understand it. Now it's like they move forward to say, hey, let's go to a whole new destination, because they understood what was going on. Like it was like in, you know, they say the elephant in the room. They can
Hmm.
see the things that was going on, but they weren't able to put two and two together and understood what was going on in the family. But when they came out and they understood, like, hey, trauma is this, and it's like, wow, oh, this is why I was acting this way. This is why I treated my daughter this way. And it's like literally now that they understood that, they started to now take a different pattern in the way they move on as a family. And now they're having a conference in Florida, right? And they're like, hey, Cleos, come on out and come teach my congregation this thing that you taught us to now move our family to a whole new destination. Um, and for me, it is always something that I practice. Like, I put my life on the airport adventure, like, literally. Because I was like, this is what we haven't been taught. Like, the whole, it's not just the airport as in the physical plane, right? It's the concept of who we are. Like, I view it as like they studied us, understood who we are, and then developed the airport. There's a thing that is called astral plane. When you can actually physically have your body here and then your spirit transform and go to a new place. That's the same thing that the plane does. If you only on, that's why it's called astral plane, like airplane. It's the same concept. So somebody understood this concept and then developed this contingency of what is called the airport, utilize it in a physical manner now, and it's like, hey, let me take you on a plane to get to here. Back then, our ancestors weren't doing that. Our ancestors were traveling by what is called astral plane. Because our senses and instinct and all these things has been watered down generation after generation, it's like we're hard to think that reality even exists. Let me put it in a context that we can really understand. You remember back then when we, and even now, when you would think of somebody, no matter where that person is around the world, and it's like 5 minutes later you get a call from telepath, right? So it's like we used to do these things. It was not a telephone. You used to understand how you use your mind to tap into someone anywhere around the world, and it's like connect with them and they would reach out to you. This is why, like, parents, they have certain type of instinct. Like, they can be anywhere in the world and it's like something happened to their children and they can feel it. Moms have that instinct, like they can feel it. These are things that we came from. But because generation after generation they have made us unsafe, then these things that we're capable of doing, like the power, we have been losing the power over and over and over again, generation after generation. So anything that people give to us today is like we just get it to appease ourselves to say, hey, this is good. No, it's not. Because those things don't work for us as they work for other people. We have to find the things that works for us. Nature. This is what we used to utilize. Nature. These are the things that work for us, not medication. So I could go on and show you, like, the philosophy of the airport that I started to understand it from wasn't from a physical standpoint. I understood it from a spiritual standpoint, and that was what helped me in my life. And then I started to now share it with others, and I started to see people like, oh, it makes sense. And this is now, it's like going around now and showing people like, hey, this is what's going on. How did I become aware of these things? I was once depressed. Something came in my spirit, said, hey, look at this black box concept, right? And from there, it helped me in such a way that it intrigued me to start looking at the aviation industry more. And that's what I've done over the last 6 years. And the more I'm learning and understanding it, is the more I'm able to share with others so they can have the same experience that I'm having. That's what life is about. Something work for you, then share it with others so it can work for other people as well.
So can you tell us how, like, you know, you have been you have been pursuing, or you've been seeing here studying and to understand the airport and everything. Can you let the people know how important it is to really chase your dream? Because this was all just a thought at one point in time, and now you made it manifest.
So look at it. And I'm glad what you just asked, right? How do we chase our dreams?
And I said, why is it important for you to chase your dream?
Why is it important to chase your dreams?
Mm-hmm.
So look at this. It's been 20 months, consecutive months, right? So we're in August 2024, right? Go back to January 2023. From January 2023 to August 2024, that's 20 months, right? Consecutive months. I've seen things appeared in my life that I looked at it, I'm like, wow, I wasn't chasing this. So there's a contingency of what is called the law of attraction, right? Things attract to us. But when I started to understand the philosophy, the procedures, right? The principles of the airport and the aviation industry, and I apply them to my life, right? Literally apply them and practice them. Then what happened? I don't chase anything anymore. It's like things are coming my way that I'm like, wow. 20 consecutive months I was able to look at it and like, oh, this worked out. I'm starting to put it in context like divine. Like this worked out for me. I wasn't out here chasing these things, but things are coming my way like, wow, because my internal system is designed this way. Like, hey, this is what I'm attracting to come in my life. So when you look at it, it's like, it's not really about chasing your dream. It's like developing yourself, your thoughts, your idea, your philosophy, your understanding, your knowledge. And once these things are a part of you, it's like it starts to now resonate with the things that are around you. And it's like, hey, these things get attracted to each other, which is the concept of what they say, the law of attraction, right? So the law is who you are, and then it attracts the things that are around you. So when I started to understand these things, it's like I don't have to chase after these things. And it's I know that they say don't give up on your dreams. And here's you know how many times I've given up? Not because it's hard, it's like I don't want it. Because at some point you started to look at it and it's like, hey, when you achieve certain things, it's like, oh man, it's not what it like you thought it would be. Like before I was an author, it's like, hey, I want to become an author. Then when you became an author, you're like, okay, this is not what it's cracked up to be. You thought it was, right? So at times I was like, it's not that I can't achieve something, but I know from reality once you achieve it, it's like sometimes it's not what it's like cracked up to be. So at times I literally is like, oh, I don't want that anymore. And ironically, you see it coming to me. So it's like looking at it, we don't have to chase our dreams. That's what people have told us. Develop yourself into the law. And the law is something that is a part of you. And it's like if you become a part of that law that's inside of you, right? Then what happens, you start to live this type of lifestyle. It's only when you break the law now that you said, you know, they say, hey, I have integrity. That's the law inside of you. If you break that integrity, then what happened to your life now? You start to fall apart. It's the same thing. These things that I'm practicing, like I live them. These are the laws of my life. So when I live them now, it's like, hey, this is what's attracting to my life. It's like I don't have to run out chasing these things. So it's the idea of if you understand these things and you apply them to your life, they become a part of your life, and then your circle now start to inherit these things in your life. You don't have to chase anything.
So you're saying you need to develop your being, and by you developing who you are as a person, then everything around you sits there and becomes attracted to you, and you don't even need to go out there and say and start trying to chase anything because that's just the way the universe works.
And that's the whole principle of life. Like the tree develops who the tree is. You don't see it moving, trying to get anything else in life. It stays in one place and it gets everything because it's a tree. The water, the same thing. It's only when you try to become something else that you're not supposed to be, then you break the law of who you are. And then because you break the law, just like any law when you're driving, and if you break the speed limit, then a cop come after you, right? But if you drive within the speed limit, there would never be a cop chasing you unless you're black, right? Right? But that's another aspect. But you get what I'm saying? So when you live in the law of who you're supposed to be, then these things happen for your life naturally. These things come to you. Like you have what is called revelation. Revelation is not you chasing after something. Revelation is what come to you, things that are revealed. And when things are revealed to you, you are on a certain level, right? Because you have developed yourself, so you have this revelation now. And it's the same thing with a dream. And it's something that I'm really looking at now because lately I changed my diet. And I had a strict diet before, but lately I changed it to even be more stricter. And I'm telling you, I started to write down these things. I'm like, wow, these things are making sense to me now. It's like they're coming faster. And I started to sit down now and I'm like, hey, what happened? What did I do? And now I was able to say, oh, I changed my diet. When I changed my diet, the things that are going inside of me now, right in my stomach, they're not interfering with my thought pattern. So it's almost like now it's like, hey, guess what? When you change your diet, it now allow you to bring forth what? Thoughts at a faster pace. The more the thoughts are coming out faster, is the more you'll have an idea of what that dream is going to be. The more that dream comes to you at a faster level, the easier it is for you to start understanding what it is, and then the quicker you'll get to it. So when I started to look at it, it's like, hey, they gave us all these food that was what? Making us slow in our thoughts. And when your thoughts are slow, then you don't produce the ideas and dreams that you really need to actually produce. So now you start to chase after things that are not even relevant to who you are, but just to things that are appeasing and not really pleasing to your life.
Okay, so can you tell us what is one thing or what's a concern that you have when it comes to the youth?
The concern that I have is that us as adults, many of the adults don't understand who they are. So if you don't understand who you are, you can't teach somebody else who they are, right? So in that context now is looking at it and saying that it's almost like the blind leading the blind.
Uh-huh.
And that's what's been going on generation after generation.
Is that the
We've
blind is
been
leading the blind?
leading our youth into a blind, like blind runway. So when the youth take off, now it's almost like they're blinded. So it's like something is going to happen, right? And guess what? They're going to return to the gate. And that's what has been going on generation after generation. I know Socrates said, know thyself, right? That was also shared that Imhotep said that as well, right? Um, Maslow has this hierarchy which is called the hierarchy of needs, right? And on the top it says self-actualization. So when you start to put these things together, it's like understanding who you are as the self and then begin to now teach others these things. If you don't understand who you are and then you're going to teach the youth, what is it that you're really teaching them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the issue with adults is that we don't understand who we are. So we're teaching the children from, it's like the context of what we understand. But when you look at the history of who we are, right, it wasn't fully taught to us. So when we're now teaching our children, it's like we're teaching them based on what we were taught, not from an aviated concept. So this is the major issue that I see. And when our children go out there and reflect these things in society, they're just reflecting what they see we do, what they hear we do, what they understand that we're doing, because they're not picking these things up just by themselves. They're seeing what's going on in their environment. And it's like now they're going out there and acting that way. And it's like we penalize them. And it's funny because in psychology, it tells you that the brain is not fully developed until 25, 26, right? And some of our children that are making these ill decisions are less than what, 25, 26, meaning that their brain is not fully developed where they can consciously say, hey, this is right or wrong. So basically before that age, they're looking at what we're doing, and then now they're deciphering that and say, hey, let me do it in my own way. And then now we penalize them, and it's like, hey, we're penalizing them because they followed what we're doing. Like somebody, a child goes out there and beat up another child, right? Where did the child get it from? They have to have seen an adult do it. So we're penalizing our children based on what we have done to ourselves as adults. And that is the biggest problem that I'm seeing.
Mm. So how can how okay. So how can we move forward in a better path
Um,
or on a better path?
and I don't want to be biased and say it, but I'm telling you what I've learned in the aviation industry for the last 6 years that I've been studying it. It's been phenomenal, right? And it's like, hey, how do I learn these things, understand them, and then now start to teach other people? It's like, this is what was designed for us from, like what you would say, the get go from our ancestors. This is how they live. So when you look at it, it's like, I'm discovering something that wasn't really given to us, right? For us to fully operate. And for me, I'm not saying that I'm biased because I was brought into this concept because I wasn't looking for it. I was just going through the problem that I was going through, and something tapped into my spirit and said, hey, look at this black box. And because of what that one scenario did for my life, I started to now venture off into looking into the whole industry. And the more I found things in it, I was like, hey, let me apply these things to my life. And I started to see the difference in my thinking, my understanding. And it's like, hey, how do you get this to our people now so they can begin to think different, understand different things, generate new thoughts, right? And then let your life aviate to a whole new destination. And then these are the things that now becomes natural, which is why I call it the airport adventure, right? Adventure is like going on a natural path, right? And it's like when you go on a natural path, what do you think you're going to discover? Things that are natural, not things that are chemically made or biologically designed to destroy you. You go on a path that's natural. And a big part of that is the air that we're continuing to breathe. I can't stress that enough, which is why I look at it and when I sit down to like create things, I go from the concept of what is called air port. Even though I'm using the airport, I go from air port because it's the air that comes in our port that dictates what we're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, our feelings, our thoughts, and stuff like that. And if I'm having beef with you, you may not know it, but the quality of air changes in my like my whole system. Now I'm feeling threatened and I'm gonna do what? Retaliate on you and vice versa, right? So these are things that I learn, and it's like, hey, how do we go towards something that could be beneficial? Like literally we have tried everything else and we're still returning to the gate. So might as well we try something else. And this is what I'm trying. The whole concept of the aviation industry. And I was able to tie it back into our ancestors. Like, oh, this is what they used to do. This is what the pyramid was connected to. So they never went out and planted crop unless they understood the astronomy of what was going to go on, like the food that we're harvesting. They had to understand the season and all these things, and they utilized the air for that whole concept. So it's not something that I made up. It's something that came in my life, and I started to research it and understand it more. And the more I understood it, it was the difference between understanding engine oil and cooking oil and which one we need to put in our system, which I'm like, wow, we need to have an aviation system inside of us. Why? So we can now aviate just like the plane does.
Hmm. Okay, okay, I like this. I like this. Can you tell the people where they can find you at?
They can find me on any social media under the Cleos Glory Young or the Airport Adventure if you type it in. And it's funny, I just even typed in who is Cleos Young under AI, and it literally brought up stuff. I was like, wow, that's impressive. So even AI could tell you, like, it's not something that I made up. And it's funny, when I was reading the stuff that AI brought up, I was like, wow, I did all that. And it's like, yeah, but it's like you're not paying attention to these things. So you can go to AI social media or even my website, the Airport Adventure.
Can you spell for the people, please?
The Airport Adventure, just like airport and adventure. Type that in. Cleos Glory Young, Cleous, Glory, Glowry. So I spelled it differently. Last name Young. Any one of the social medias, you can go and find me.
What's a message that you want to leave for the people?
So the message that I would like to leave for the people is to understand that there are things out there that we need to tap into that we haven't tapped into as yet. And the things are not weird or crazy. It's just that we weren't introduced to them in the right way. So even for me, when I started out with the airport adventure, I was telling people like, hey, I want to utilize this to help people with their social issue. I was laughed at. Now I'm leading conferences or even plays and stuff like that that are showing you these concepts and how they really make sense to your life. But when I started off, it was like, oh, that's crazy, laughter. But 6 years down the road now, I'm literally showing people like all over now how this is applicable to your life. Because there are things that we have never tapped into that are actually in existence. So for me, it's like throw away all the things that you have learned and start to now focus on what you can now discover as you move forward. Because half the stuff that we were taught were like cooking oil. And
Hmm.
your engine, and it's like you need engine oil. So it's like, hey, throw away that cooking oil and find your engine oil. What is it going to be that is going to run your engine into the way it needs to really materialize and manifest in its full capacity and not continue to break down generation after generation? So
Hmm.
that's the message that I would leave with you. Find the engine oil and stop looking at the cooking oil that we have given. It's not the same.
Hmm. All right, all right. All right, I appreciate you, Brother Cleos. I just dropped the gems, dropped them gems on us. All right. All right, we'll see you around, y'all.
All right, thank you.